Hash the late bloom. The note was pinned to my pillow when I jolted awake on my son's wedding morning. Congratulations, you finally found a hairstyle that suits a woman your age. Enjoy the day. I reached up, smooth skin. My scalp burned, the sharp sting of antiseptic still clinging to the air like a bitter perfume. I did not scream. I lay there for a moment, listening to the silence of the house, to the distant sound of pigeons on the rooftop, to the faint rustle of November wind through the old oak outside my window. Then I swung my legs over the side of the bed, crossed the room to the antique safe built into the closet wall, and I changed the entire game. I froze when I caught my reflection in the full-length mirror beside the bathroom door. The woman staring back at me was not Margaret Hollowell, the woman who had built a construction empire across the Pacific Northwest, who had shaken hands with governors and signed deals that reshaped city skylines. She was someone humiliated to her marrow. The thick chestnut hair I had tended for 64 years, hair that had gone silver and graceful, hair my late husband once called my crown, was gone. Every strand. What remained was a raw, reddened scalp that gleamed under the bedroom light. Tears rushed to my eyes. I forced them back. They wanted me to collapse. They wanted me to lock myself in this room, miss my own son's wedding, and disappear quietly so they could collect what they believed was theirs. I was not going to hand Vivienne that victory. Not today, not ever. On the walnut nightstand beside the lamp sat a cream-colored envelope. The handwriting on the front was careful, deliberate, almost theatrical in its neatness. I recognized that hand immediately, the precise, looping script of my future daughter-in-law. Inside was a single card. Have a wonderful day at our wedding. See you at the altar. V. A tiny drawn heart at the end, mocking in its cheerfulness. The card still carried her signature scent, white jasmine and sandalwood, expensive and unmistakable. I set it on the dresser face down and breathed slowly. The bedroom safe was still ajar from the previous evening, when I had placed inside it the thick envelope containing the paperwork for a wire transfer of $18 million, my wedding gift to my son Daniel and his bride Vivienne. I had spent 3 weeks preparing it. I had believed, genuinely and desperately believed, that this gift would be the final bridge between us, the gesture that would make Vivienne see me not as an obstacle but as a mother worth respecting, and that would keep Daniel tethered to me by more than obligation. Now I reached into the safe and took up that envelope. The paper that had felt smooth and purposeful the night before now felt sharp against my palm, like the edge of a blade pressed gently to skin. I set it back inside. I turned the dial. The dry metal click echoed in the quiet room. The decision arrived without deliberation, without ceremony. That money was staying in that safe. I called my attorney, Franklin Cross, who had handled my legal affairs for 17 years. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the crisp professionalism that never left him even on a Saturday morning. Margaret, I trust you're calling to confirm the transfer details. I have everything drawn up and ready for your signature this afternoon. I kept my own voice level, almost conversational. Franklin, put the entire thing on hold. Nothing moves. Not a single dollar, not today, not until you hear from me again. And tonight, after the reception, I need you at my home. We are going to rewrite everything, the trust, the will, all of it. A pause, the kind of pause a careful man takes before he speaks. Is something wrong? I closed my eyes. Through the window, a pale November sky stretched over the neighborhood, white and still. Just one thing, I said. I finally woke up. I set the phone down on the dresser and stood for a moment looking at the safe. Then I walked to the closet and began to dress. My hands were still trembling, a fine, barely visible tremor that I recognized from the worst moments of my life. The day the hospital called about Richard. The morning I signed the papers dissolving my first company after a business partner's betrayal. The night Daniel, then 16, told me he wished his father was still alive to run things so I could just stay home. Each of those tremors had eventually steadied. This one would too. I pulled a deep burgundy dress from its hanger, a gown I had bought for myself after closing the contract on a 14-story mixed-use development in downtown Portland. I had worn it to the completion ceremony, surrounded by architects and city planners and contractors who called me formidable. I slipped into it now as if putting on armor, because that is precisely what it was. The landline rang. I nearly did not answer, but the number on the display was one I recognized. Celestine Marsh, my stylist of 22 years. "Celestine," I said before she could speak, "I need you here right now. Bring the best piece you have, something silver and elegant, and please no questions." She didn't ask a single one, only said very quietly, "I'm getting my bag. Give me 25 minutes." I sat in the armchair by the window and looked out at the garden while I waited. A light frost had settled overnight, whitening every leaf, every stone path, every dormant rose cane I had planted with my own hands the summer Richard died. I had not been a gardener before that. I had become one because I needed something alive to tend to, something that would not leave. Memories arrived uninvited, the way they always do on days when the present becomes too large. I was 33 years old when Richard Hollowell died of a cardiac arrest on the interstate, alone in his car on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Daniel was 13. I sat in the hospital corridor for 2 hours before I could make myself stand. A nurse brought me water in a paper cup. I did not drink it. When I walked out to where Daniel sat in a plastic waiting room chair, small, pale, his school tie still knotted, he looked up at me and said only, "Mom." And I understood everything in that single syllable. I was all he had. We went home to a house that suddenly felt enormous and hollow. That night I sat at the kitchen table after Daniel had fallen asleep, and I laid out on the table everything we had. A savings account, a modest life insurance payout, Richard's half-finished business notes for a small contracting firm we had been planning to launch together. We had talked about it at dinner the week he died. Nothing more than an idea scrawled in a yellow legal pad. I looked at those notes for a long time. Then I picked up a pen and began to add to them. The years that followed were not elegant. They were early mornings and late nights and lunches skipped so Daniel could have new school shoes. They were cold calls made from a desk in the spare bedroom, proposals written at midnight, bids submitted with shaking hands, contracts that almost came through and then didn't. They were also, slowly, steadily, the first signs of something real. A small renovation job on a neighborhood duplex, then a commercial remodel, then a modest office building in Tacoma. Then something larger. I learned the language of construction and finance the way someone learns a foreign language by necessity, imperfectly at first, then fluently, then eventually dreaming in it. I hired carefully. I kept my word. I built a reputation for delivering on time and on budget, which in the construction world is rarer than most people realize. By the time Daniel graduated from college, Hollowell Development had become a name people in the Pacific Northwest recognized. He walked across that stage in his graduation robe, and I sat in the audience with my hands folded in my lap, quietly overwhelmed. I thought, I did it. I turned loss into something. What I did not see, what I could not see from that angle, in that light, with that particular ache of love blurring my vision, was the expression on my son's face. Not gratitude, something cooler, something that assumed. By 28, Daniel was asking for a downtown condominium as a birthday gift, phrasing it not as a question, but as an expectation. By 31, he was requesting that I cover a 6-week trip through Southeast Asia for him and Vivienne, framed with a kind of cheerful entitlement that assumed the answer before it was given. I always gave, because I was terrified of the alternative. And then Vivienne. She arrived in my son's life 3 years ago like a well-rehearsed performance. Charming in company, sophisticated in conversation, fluent in all the right cultural references. She spoke about art and travel and environmental design with the ease of someone who had always had access to such things. In groups, she was luminous. Alone with me, or nearly alone, in the margins of family dinners and holiday gatherings, she was something different. The warmth shuddered. The eyes became calculating. She would deliver small, precise cruelties wrapped in the packaging of concern. Margaret, that shade of rose washes out women our age, don't you think? I only mention it because I care. Daniel tells me you still do site visits yourself. That must be exhausting at your stage of life. You should really start stepping back. Have you considered that holding on to the company is actually holding Daniel back? He has ideas, but he can't truly implement them while you're still at the helm. And Daniel would sit there, swirling his wine, saying nothing. I made excuses for them both. I told myself that Vivienne was still settling into the family, that Daniel was finding his footing as a partner and would grow into more backbone, that the tension was generational, not malicious. I kept opening my checkbook and closing my mouth, believing that generosity would eventually soften what criticism could not. The $18 million was the final expression of that belief, an enormous, desperate, loving gesture, a mother's last attempt to buy her way into her son's regard. This morning's note, the burning scalp, the cold click of the safe, had shattered that belief entirely. Celestine arrived in 23 minutes, carrying a long black case and a smaller bag of tools. When she saw me standing in the middle of the bedroom in my burgundy dress with my bare, reddened scalp, she covered her mouth with one hand. Her eyes went bright with something that was not quite tears, but lived in the same neighborhood. "Celestine," I said, cutting gently across whatever she was about to say. "Help me stand tall today. That's all I need from you." She set her case on the dressing table without another word, and got to work. It took the better part of an hour. The piece she had brought was a masterwork, a soft silver and chestnut blend, shoulder length, styled with the natural movement of real hair. When she held up the hand mirror, I looked at myself for a long time. The woman in the glass was composed. She had the steady gaze of someone who had built things from nothing and was not afraid of rubble. I recognized her. I thanked Celestine with more warmth than I managed to put into words, pressed a thick envelope into her hands, far more than her usual fee, and walked her to the door. Then I came back inside and stood in the kitchen for a moment, alone. I opened my handbag and placed inside it a small voice recorder. Slim, silver, barely larger than a lipstick case. I had purchased it 2 weeks ago for a contract negotiation and had kept it in my desk drawer since. Something had made me think to bring it this morning. Standing here now, scalp still tingling, that something felt less like instinct and more like providence. The clock on the kitchen wall read 10 past 10. The ceremony at St. Crispin's, one of Seattle's oldest stone churches, was scheduled for 1 in the afternoon. 3 hours. I pulled on a charcoal wool coat, wrapped a soft cashmere scarf around my neck. One Daniel had given me on my 60th birthday, back when such gestures were still real, and walked out to the car. My driver, Hector, glanced at me in the rearview mirror with the look of a man who wanted to ask something and had the good sense not to. I shook my head slightly. He nodded and pulled away from the curb without a word. Seattle's November light has a particular quality, gray and luminous at once, as if the sky itself is undecided. I watched the city pass outside the window. A couple walking a large dog along the waterfront. A grandmother lifting a small child up to look at something in a shop window. Ordinary acts of tenderness, unaware of themselves, not performing for anyone. I wondered, as I often had in difficult moments, how many of the people I passed were carrying something invisible. How many had been used by someone they had trusted completely. How many had confused generosity with love, and given until there was nothing left that wasn't taken for granted. The car stopped at the iron gates of St. Crispin's. I pressed one hand flat against my sternum and breathed. What I felt was not what I expected. It was not the jagged anguish of the bathroom mirror. It was something simpler and more dangerous. Clarity. I opened the car door and stepped out into the cold. The interior of St. Crispin's smelled of stone and candles and old wood, the way churches built before the 20th century always do. High-arched ceilings swallowed sound and returned it softened. Staff moved between the pews arranging flowers, white garden roses and deep red dahlias, Vivienne's chosen palette, while the organist worked through a rehearsal piece, notes rising and falling unevenly. I took a seat near the front and held a leather-bound order of service in my gloved hands without looking at it. My mind was too busy. The betrayal of this morning was not a surprise, I realized. Not truly. It was the culmination of 1,000 smaller betrayals I had chosen to absorb because the alternative, acknowledging them, felt more costly than endurance. Each time Daniel laughed along with one of Vivienne's pointed remarks at my expense, I had swallowed it. Each time a request arrived framed as an expectation, I had met it. I had been erasing myself in small daily increments for 3 years, and this morning, someone had simply made that erasure literal and visible. I was still sitting with that thought when I heard my son's voice. It came from somewhere behind the main altar, in the stone corridor that ran along the north wall. Low and urgent, the way voices get when they are trying to be quiet, but the words are pressing too hard. I rose from the pew and moved carefully along the side aisle, staying close to the wall. I found a position behind a broad column carved with interlocking vine patterns, close enough to hear but invisible in the shadow. Daniel's voice. "Petra, I told you not to call until after the ceremony. Just hold on a few more hours." A pause while he listened. I know it's hard. But look, the moment the signing happens this afternoon and the funds clear, everything changes. We won't have to be careful anymore. I'll sort things with Vivienne. It's all structured. Just be patient a little longer, please. Petra. The name landed in my chest like something thrown hard from a short distance. Petra Nguyen, Daniel's project coordinator. I had met her several times at company events, quick, bright, genuinely talented, always with a ready smile. I had liked her. I had thought she was simply an excellent employee. Daniel's voice again, dropping lower. "You know how my mother is. She spent 30 years feeling guilty about raising me alone. She'll do anything to keep me close. As soon as she signs the transfer documents this afternoon, we're free. A clean start. No obligations, no drama." I pressed my back against the column and kept absolutely still. The recorder in my handbag was on. I had turned it on before leaving the car, out of habit, out of something that new. He continued, "After the honeymoon, I'll handle the rest. Vivienne will get what the lawyers decide. You and I just have to hold on until then. Can you do that for me?" The sound of footsteps approaching from the main hall. Daniel's voice cut off. A brief, low goodbye. The click of a call ended. I moved back along the wall toward my pew and sat down before he emerged. My hands, when I looked at them, were perfectly still. The storm inside had apparently decided to express itself as cold. I sat there with my order of service and my quiet recorder, and I thought about the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and present them with enormous seriousness, as if they were roses. I thought about the 13-year-old in the hospital waiting room. I thought about every school morning I had driven him while exhausted from a double shift of work, every care package I had mailed during his university years, every check I had written without question. He thought I did it out of guilt. He had turned my love into a character flaw and was planning to leverage it for $18 million. I set the order of service on the pew beside me and drew a long, slow breath. Then I rose and walked toward the bridal preparation room. The door to the bridal room sat half open, white light and female voices spilling into the corridor. I stopped a few feet away, in the shadow beside a flower arrangement on a pedestal. I had no particular plan. I simply found that my feet would not carry me past. Through the gap in the door, Vivienne's voice, confident, bright, performing for her audience of bridesmaids. Honestly, by the end of next year, this entire situation resolves itself. Half of 18 million, by law, is mine the moment we sign those documents today, and I have already spoken with a very good attorney. Laughter from the room, at least 3 women. A bridesmaid's voice. What about the ceremony? What about Daniel? Vivienne, her tone dropping to something crisper. Daniel is a means to an end, a generous one, and he's not particularly perceptive, which helps. More laughter. Another voice. What about his mother? She seems like she could be difficult. A pause, then Vivienne almost cheerfully. Margaret, she's already on the way out. I've been laying the groundwork for months. Once the money is settled and we have legal standing in the company, I push Daniel to have her step back from Hollowell Development. We frame it as retirement. She's in her 60s, it's not even a hard sell. And if she becomes a problem, there are very lovely assisted living facilities in the area. Somewhere comfortable, somewhere out of the way. The room erupted in laughter. I stood in the corridor outside, and did not move for nearly 10 seconds. Then, very deliberately, I checked the recorder in my bag. The small red light blinked steadily. I walked back to my pew. I sat, I smoothed my coat. I folded my gloved hands in my lap. Around me, the church was filling now, guests settling into pews with murmured greetings, programs rustling. A great aunt I had not seen in years found me and clasped my hands and said how proud I must be. I smiled and said I certainly was. She moved on. I thought of a line from a book I had read the winter after Richard died, during those long sleepless nights when Daniel was asleep and I was at the kitchen table with contracts and coffee. The deepest revenge is not destruction of the enemy, but the building of yourself. I hadn't understood it then. I had filed it away somewhere. I understood it now. The ceremony was impeccable. Vivienne walked the aisle in a French-designed gown with a cathedral train, her composure as flawless as the lace. Daniel stood at the altar looking every inch the handsome groom, his smile confident, his posture straight. I watched them both with the particular attention of someone who knows a performance is being given. When the vows were exchanged, Daniel's voice steady and sincere, Vivienne's eyes shining with what appeared to be genuine emotion, I listened to every word and held the knowledge of the corridor and the bridal room behind my breastbone like a stone. I promise to love you, to be faithful to you, to stand beside you in every season of this life. I bit the inside of my cheek. When the officiant reached the traditional pause, if anyone here present knows of any reason these two should not be joined, I kept my hands folded and my expression serene. Not yet. The timing was wrong. The audience, though present, was scattered, distracted by sentiment. I needed them attentive. I needed them gathered and looking in one direction. I needed the reception. The bells of St. Crispin's rang across the November afternoon, and my son kissed his bride, and the church filled with applause. I clapped too, steadily with a small and private smile. The reception was held in the ballroom of a historic hotel 3 blocks from the church, a venue Vivienne had chosen for its marble floors and its chandeliers and its unambiguous sense of occasion. Everything was white and gold. The tables were laden with flowers and crystal. A string quartet played in the corner as guests found their seats. I moved through the room greeting people I had known for decades, business associates, old family friends, Richard's brother and his wife from Portland. I was gracious and unhurried and present. No one could have looked at me and seen anything other than a proud and composed mother of the groom. Inside my handbag, the recorder nestled in its pocket, full of truth. I took my seat at the head table. Daniel and Vivienne were already there, Vivienne laughing at something a bridesmaid said, her hand resting proprietarily on my son's sleeve. Daniel caught my eye and smiled, a smile I had once found completely disarming. Tonight it looked like what it was, performance by a man who believed his performance had already succeeded. Dinner was served, wine was poured. Toasts were made by the best man, by Vivienne's sister, by an old friend of Daniel's from his college years, all warm and genuine and thoroughly unknowing. Then the MC, a polished young man in a fitted suit, stepped to the microphone and said, "And now, we are honored to invite the mother of the groom, Margaret Hollowell, to share a few words with us on this very special evening." The room turned toward me, expectant, warm, ready to be moved. I stood. I lifted my champagne glass. I smiled. Thank you all for being here to celebrate with our family tonight. For me, this moment carries a particular weight because I am watching my son begin a new chapter, and that is no small thing for a mother. Murmurs of approval, hands reaching for champagne flutes. For 31 years, since the day I lost my husband Richard and found myself alone with a 13-year-old boy and a half-finished legal pad full of business ideas, I have lived by a single commitment: to give Daniel everything I could and to never let him feel the fear of having nothing. Every early morning, every missed vacation, every contract I signed under fluorescent light at 2 a.m, it was for him. The room was quiet now. Even the string quartet had stilled. And so, this evening, I had planned to announce something significant: a wedding gift of $18 million, a transfer of the savings of my lifetime to Daniel and his new wife. I had the paperwork prepared. I believed this gift would be a bridge, a way of saying, I trust you with what I built. I paused. Daniel's expression had shifted. The easy confidence was narrowing, becoming something more watchful. Vivienne's chin had lifted. But there is something my years in business have taught me, and I would be dishonest to stand here and not speak it. I set my champagne glass down on the table. Not every investment is what it appears to be, and not every gesture of love is received as love. I reached into my handbag and placed the slim recorder on the white tablecloth. This morning, I heard some things I was not meant to hear. And because I believe in honesty in rooms like this one, among people I respect, I think you should hear them too. The room was absolutely still. I pressed play. Daniel's voice, captured perfectly in the stone corridor of St. Crispin's, filled the ballroom through the small speaker. The moment the signing happens this afternoon and the funds clear, everything changes. You know how my mother is. She spent 30 years feeling guilty about raising me alone. She'll do anything to keep me close. As soon as she signs the transfer documents, we're free. A clean start. No obligations, no drama. A collective sound moved through the room, not quite a gasp, not quite silence, something between. Daniel was on his feet before the clip ended. Mom, that is completely out of context. You don't understand what. Please sit down, Daniel. My voice was level, unhurried, it carried. He sat. I let the second clip play. Vivienne will get what the lawyers decide. You and I just have to hold on. The room erupted. Not loudly. The eruption was one of exchanged glances, sharp intakes of breath, the particular electric tension of people realizing that what they have been watching all day was not what they thought. Vivienne's hand shot out and gripped Daniel's arm. Her face, for the first time since I had known her, showed something unscripted. I turned to her. And you, Vivienne. I kept my tone entirely conversational. I also heard you in the bridal room this afternoon. You told your bridesmaids that Daniel is, and I want to make sure I represent this accurately, a means to an end asterisk. That once the transfer cleared, your next call would be to your attorney. That I specifically should be moved to an assisted living facility so as to be, in your words, asterisk out of the way. A bridesmaid, near the middle of the room, went very pale. Vivienne stood. That is an absolute fabrication. You have no. I have this. I touched the recorder, and I have witnesses who were in that room. Silence. The bridesmaid, who had gone pale, looked at her hands. Vivienne looked at the bridesmaid. Something shifted in her expression, the realization that loyalty, when tested, sometimes fails. I picked up my champagne glass again. The $18 million will not be transferred today, or any other day, to either of you. Paperwork has been placed on hold, and my attorney is rewriting the relevant documents as we speak. I looked out at the assembled guests, friends of 40 years, business colleagues, family, people who had known me at my worst and my best. I'm sorry that this evening became what it became, but I am not sorry for speaking the truth. My late husband, Richard, used to say that the most expensive thing in the world is a secret kept too long. Tonight, I'm afraid, some secrets have become unaffordable. I set the glass down. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. And I walked out of the ballroom. I was nearly to the lobby when the footsteps came behind me, rapid, uneven, the sound of someone who had been sitting and stood too fast. Daniel. He caught my arm, not roughly, but with the desperate grip of someone drowning and reaching for whatever is nearest. Mom, please, just let me explain. You heard things without context, and I know how it sounded, but I swear. I turned and looked at my son, really looked at him. Beneath the tuxedo and the careful hair and the evening's ruin, he was the 13-year-old in the hospital waiting room. He was also the adult who had chosen, knowingly and deliberately, to treat his mother as a resource. Both things were true. I detached his hand from my arm, gently. Daniel, every explanation you could offer, I have already heard inside. Not from you, from your own voice, on a phone call, when you thought no one was listening. There is no context that changes what you said or what you planned. I can fix it. I'll call off everything with I'll end it. I'll be different. Mom, please, you're all I have. I looked at him for a long moment. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in years. Then I turned and kept walking. Vivienne caught me at the lobby doors. She did not look like the composed, luminous woman who had walked the aisle of St. Crispin's 4 hours ago. Her mascara had traced gray lines down her cheeks. Her voice, when she spoke, was stripped of its social finish. You had no right. This was my wedding day. You stood up in front of everyone I know and... I stood up in front of everyone I know, I said, and told them the truth, which is something you might consider trying. You ruined everything. No, I pulled my coat closed against the draft from the lobby doors. You built the thing that ruined everything. I simply refused to fund it. A male guest who had followed us from the ballroom stepped between us as Vivienne's hands came up, not to strike, but with the wild, ineffective energy of someone who doesn't know what to do with themselves. The guest, a longtime colleague of mine named Everett, simply held out one hand and said, "Vivienne, stop." She stopped. Then she crumpled, in the way that people crumple when the performance finally becomes untenable, all at once, completely, with a kind of relief underneath the grief. I did not watch for long. I walked through the doors and into the cold November night. The next morning I woke early, before the light had fully decided what it was going to be. I made coffee in the French press Richard had given me on our last anniversary together, and I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet. I called Franklin Cross at 8:30. He answered immediately. "I've been expecting your call," he said. "I've already begun drafting the new documents. The transfer is fully halted. What are your wishes regarding the will?" I told him. Daniel would receive nothing from my estate. Not immediately, not as it was currently structured. The assets held in the Hollowell Family Trust would be redirected, the majority to a foundation I intended to establish, a grant program for widowed mothers and single parents looking to start businesses. People who knew, as I had known, what it was to be alone with a child and a dream and very little else. The company, Hollowell Development, the thing I had built from a legal pad and a grief so large I could only survive it by doing, would remain under my control for as long as I was able to lead it, and upon my retirement would be overseen by a professional board I would appoint. "And if Daniel contests?" Franklin asked. "He's welcome to. The recordings are legal in this state under single-party consent, and I have witnesses." I thought of the pale bridesmaid. Potentially more than one. Franklin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Margaret, I've handled your legal affairs for 17 years. I want you to know that what you're doing takes an extraordinary kind of clarity." I looked out the window at the frost-covered garden. "I had help," I said. "Someone clarified things for me this morning, very directly." The weeks that followed were strange and very quiet. I went to the office every day because that is what I have always done, and because Hollowell Development had 3 major projects in progress and 47 employees who deserved a functioning leader regardless of what had happened at a wedding. I answered my emails. I reviewed the bids on a residential complex in Bellevue. I had lunch with my project director, a sharp and straightforward woman named Audrey, who said nothing about the wedding and everything about the Bellevue numbers, which was exactly what I needed. In the evenings, the house was very still. I was not, I discovered, afraid of the stillness. I had been afraid of it for years, had filled it with Daniel's needs and Vivienne's demands and the endless productivity of someone running from their own silence. Sitting now in the kitchen with a cup of jasmine tea and the sound of the garden beyond the window, I found I could tolerate it. More than tolerate. One Thursday afternoon in early December, I walked past a small studio space near the waterfront. It had a wooden sign in the window. Painting workshops, all levels welcome, all ages welcome. Through the glass, I could see a long table, 6 people seated before canvases, a woman in paint-speckled clothing moving between them with the unhurried energy of someone doing exactly what they are meant to do. I stood outside for almost 5 minutes. Then I opened the door and went inside. The instructor's name was Nora. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, with cropped silver hair and an expression of such genuine welcome that I almost forgot why I had come in. I told her I had no experience and that I hesitated over the word available for a new thing. She said, "Then you're in exactly the right place." I signed up for the Saturday morning class. The first session, we painted the harbor in winter. Nora set up our view from the large studio windows, the gray-green water, the moored boats, the far hills just visible through low clouds. She talked about what she called first marks, the moment when you put paint on canvas for the first time and commit to something, knowing it can be corrected but cannot be taken back. I picked up the brush and made a mark. It was clumsy. The color was too dark, the proportion wrong. Nora appeared at my shoulder, considered it without judgment, and said, "Now make another one." By the end of 3 hours, I had something on the canvas that resembled, with generosity, a harbor in winter. Nora held it at arm's length and said, "There's something alive in this. Keep going." I drove home with paint on my fingers and a feeling I could not immediately name. It arrived gradually as I made dinner. The sensation of having done something entirely for myself, without a thought of whether it benefited Daniel, or impressed a client, or fulfilled an obligation to anyone. Something purely and simply mine. I sat at the kitchen table that evening and cried for the first time since the morning of the wedding. Not from grief, from relief. The other person who had entered my life by this point, quietly, without announcement, was a man named Oliver Marsh. I had noticed him in the 3rd or 4th painting class, seated 2 places down from me, regarding his canvas with the focused expression of someone much more accustomed to technical problems than aesthetic ones. He was perhaps 68 or 70, lean, with the kind of posture that suggests a life spent on building sites or in fields rather than offices. When he spoke, his voice had a deliberate quality, the voice of someone who had learned to choose words carefully. He had been a civil engineer, 40-year career. He had retired the previous year after his wife, Eleanor, died of a progressive illness that had taken 3 years to complete its work. He had started painting, he told me matter-of-factly one morning as we both struggled with the same stretch of gray water, because his therapist had suggested it and he had run out of better ideas. "Are you any good?" I asked him. He looked at his canvas. "Absolutely not, but Nora tells me that's an advantage." I laughed. It surprised me, the laugh. It arrived before I had a chance to prepare for it, which is the only kind that counts. Oliver was not intrusive. He did not ask questions designed to extract intimacy. He simply appeared, week after week, with his paint-stained hands and his careful observations about color and light, and the strange way effort sometimes produces the opposite of what was intended. One Saturday, when my work felt dead on the canvas and I was verging on frustration, he leaned over and said, "Wrong brushes. You're painting too carefully. Try the wide one. Make a mess." I made a mess. The painting came alive. It was, I realized later, excellent practical advice that applied to more than painting. We began to take our coffee outside after class when the weather permitted, seated on the low stone wall that faced the water, talking in the way that people talk when they have reached an age where pretense costs more than it's worth. He told me about Eleanor, about the particular loneliness of losing someone slowly versus all at once, about the engineering projects he was most proud of and least proud of, about his daughter in Vancouver who called every Sunday and meant it. I told him about Richard, about Daniel, about the wedding eventually, not the full theatrical version, just the facts, plainly stated. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You could have stayed silent," he said. "Most people would have." "I know. Why didn't you?" I thought about it. Because I'd been silent for 30 years, and it had produced exactly this. He nodded. "Fair enough. Then, how do you feel now?" "Like someone who has stopped running," I said, "and is surprised to find they're not tired, just out of breath." He considered that. "You'll get your breath back." We sat looking at the water for a while. The winter light on the harbor was the particular color I had been trying to capture in my paintings without success. Looking at it now, with no brush in my hand, I understood it better than I had when I was trying to paint it. Spring arrived. and with it the particular quality of light that makes Seattle look like a city that has been holding its breath all winter and finally exhaled. I had changed the house. Not dramatically. I was not redecorating for performance. I was adjusting for reality. The family photographs that had covered the hallway wall for 20 years came down. I did not throw them away. I stored them carefully in a flat box on a closet shelf because they were true records of true moments, and truth does not deserve to be discarded even when its context has changed. In their place, I hung 3 of my own paintings: The Winter Harbor, a study of my garden in frost, and a larger piece I had worked on for 6 weeks. A woman standing at the edge of the ocean, her back to the viewer, her posture neither defiant nor defeated, simply present. Oliver had seen that last one when I brought it to class for feedback. He stood in front of it for longer than he looked at anything. Then he said, "That's the best thing you've made." "I know," I said. "I didn't mean to make it." "Those are usually the best ones." The foundation was formally established in April. I named it the Hollowell Rising Fund, and I hated the name immediately and changed it to the Meridian Fund, after a word I have always loved, the highest point of the sun's arc, the moment of fullness before the turn. The first grants were awarded in May. 11 women, ranging in age from 27 to 59, starting businesses in industries from food service to sustainable construction. I attended the grant ceremony in a rented community space in the south end of the city, and sat at the back and watched them receive their awards and thought of a kitchen table and a yellow legal pad, and a grief so large I could only survive it by doing. I did not cry. I felt instead a clarity so clean it resembled joy. Daniel came to the house in June. I had been expecting him for weeks, in the way you expect whether you've watched building on the horizon. He called ahead, which I appreciated. He arrived at 7 in the evening with no flowers and no prepared speech, which I appreciated more. He sat in the living room across from me, in the chair where Richard used to read, and he looked at his hands for a long time. "I don't want money," he said finally. "I know you won't give it, and I'm not here to ask." "All right. I want to know if you hate me." I looked at him across the room. At the 41-year-old man who had once been a 13-year-old with a crumpled tie and a question I couldn't answer. "No," I said. "I don't hate you. But what you did, who you were in the months leading up to that wedding and in the years before it, that wasn't the person I raised you to be, or the person I hoped you would become. The disappointment I feel about that is real and it's significant and it's not going away quickly." He nodded. He didn't argue. "Vivienne and I, it's over," he said. "Formally filed last month. It was already over that night, I think, the moment people started looking at us differently." I said nothing. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said. "Since January. She's made me look at some things I've been avoiding since for a long time. Since Dad died, actually." I looked at him carefully. "Good." "She says," he stopped, started again. "She says I conflated your willingness to provide with my having nothing to do, that I let your competence become an excuse for my own inadequacy." A beat. "She's not wrong." "No," I agreed. "She's not." He looked up. "I don't know how to fix this." "I know, neither do I, not yet." I leaned forward slightly in my chair. "But I think the fact that you're sitting across from me asking that question, rather than calling your attorney, is a start, a real one." He was quiet. "I'm not going to hand you the company," I said. "Not now. You haven't earned it and you haven't demonstrated that you would value it. But I'm also not going to close the door permanently on you, Daniel. You are my son. I carried you through your father's death. I am not capable of erasing that, and I don't want to be." I paused. "What I will not do is return to the arrangement where I give without limit and you take without thought. That is finished. If you want to rebuild something with me, you do it through effort and honesty, not through my guilt." He nodded. His eyes were wet, but he held himself together. "Can I come back?" he asked. "Not to ask for things, just to have dinner, talk, be a son in an actual sense." I thought of the harbor paintings on my wall, of Oliver's voice. Late blooming flowers are still flowers. Of the Saturday mornings now marked on my calendar with something I actually looked forward to. "You may come back," I said, "but you come back as a man who is doing the work of becoming one. The moment I see otherwise, I'll say so plainly. No more silence." He left at 9. I stood at the window and watched his car pull away from the curb, and I felt the particular mixed weight of love and consequence, and the knowledge that some things, once broken, are rebuilt into different shapes, not the original, but their own kind of whole. On a Saturday evening in late summer, Nora held a small exhibition of the studio's work in a gallery space on Capitol Hill. I brought 5 paintings: the Winter Harbor, the Frost Garden, the Standing Woman, a study of the kitchen window with tea steam rising, and a new piece, a self-portrait of sorts, though it showed only a pair of hands holding a brush, paint-stained, capable, belonging to no particular age. The gallery was warm and full of people I had come to know through the months of Saturday mornings and waterfront coffees. A visitor stood for a long time before woman at the shore, the standing figure, and eventually asked the gallery attendant if it was available to purchase. The attendant came to find me. I shook my head. "Not that one, but I'll paint you another." Oliver found me near the drinks table and handed me a glass of sparkling water with a small mock ceremony, as if it were champagne. "Your show," he said. "Our show." I contributed 2 paintings that look like fairy accidents. You contributed 5 things that actually warrant the wall space. I laughed. "Your fairy accident in blue and gray sold this afternoon." He blinked. "You're serious?" Someone thought it was an abstract seascape, which it basically is. I raised my glass. "To accidental masterworks." He raised his. "To late blooms." We clinked and I thought, yes, that is exactly what this is. I turned 65 in November, in preparation. I have done a number of things that would have seemed impossible to the woman who woke on her son's wedding morning to find her head shaved and a mocking note on her pillow. I have reorganized Hollowell Development's senior leadership team to distribute authority I had been holding alone for too long. I have handed the day-to-day operations to Audrey, who is meticulous and visionary in exactly the combination the company requires. I have moved my own role to what I call asterisk founder oversight strategic decisions, major partnerships, the things only 30 years of accumulated knowledge can speak to. I have awarded the Meridian Fund's second round of grants, 19 women this time. I paint on Saturday mornings and sometimes on weekday evenings when the light through the studio window is doing something interesting. I am not, by any technical measure, an accomplished painter. I am, by any honest measure, a person who has found something that speaks from the inside out rather than the outside in. Daniel comes to dinner on the first Sunday of each month. He arrives on time. He does the dishes without being asked. He talks about the therapy work and the small consulting business he has started from scratch, genuinely started from nothing, with his own ideas and no maternal cushion. It is going moderately well, which is the honest answer, which I recognize as progress. We are building something. It is not the original structure. It is its own architecture, and it has honest foundations. Vivienne, I understand, has settled in another city and is doing well enough. I bear her no particular ill will. The harshest thing that happened to her was not anything I did, but the simple fact of being known. The truth is always the most thorough consequence. If I could speak to the woman, I was the morning before the wedding. The woman who had prepared $18 million to buy her son's love and her daughter-in-law's respect, I would say this. The money was never the bridge. It was the wall you were building around yourself, block by block, hoping it would become something beautiful. It would not have. Walls built of guilt and fear never become beautiful. What became beautiful was the harbor painting on a cold morning, the laugh that arrived before you could prepare for it, the grant ceremony in the South End, the first Sunday dinner with a son who washed the dishes, the voice recorder in your handbag that blinked quietly in the dark, faithfully recording every truth you finally refused to ignore. You thought you lost everything when they took your hair. You hadn't lost anything yet. The losing came later, and it turned out to be releasing. Release, it turns out, has much in common with flight. The harbor is silver this morning. I can see it from the studio window, where I sit with a cup of jasmine tea and a canvas still white. Outside, the October light is doing something complicated with the water, making it look both deep and shallow at once, both still and constantly moving. Oliver will arrive in an hour with terrible coffee from the shop down the street and a willingness to sit in companionable silence that I have come to value more than I would have thought possible. Audrey sent a message last night about the Bellevue project, on schedule, under budget. The kind of message that, a year ago, I would have needed to personally verify with 3 calls. Now I read it and feel simply pleased. Daniel texted this morning. First client signed a retainer. Thought you'd want to know. I wrote back, I'm proud of you. And I meant it without ambiguity, which is itself a kind of milestone. I pick up my brush. The white canvas is a commitment, the way first marks always are. You put something down and it cannot be untaken, only adjusted, built upon, made into something. I make the first mark. It is imperfect and honest and entirely mine. That, I have learned, is the most anyone can say of anything worth making. The late bloom